So welcome everyone. This is our session number 2 on building your brain trust. We have Matt Price of Activate, who is leading the session today. He's joined by Tom Busey, also of Activate, along with Colin Bailey and Nishita Deka. So I'll do some quick intros of both Colin and Nishita. Nishita is the CEO of Sonera Magnetics. She's in cohort 2018. She did her PhD at UC Berkeley in electrical engineering, and she's working with her co-founder on a mobile magnetometer that works at room temperature for a lot of the same kind of applications that take a giant machine to do. Excited to have her here today. We also have Colin Bailey. He's the CEO of Tandem PV of cohort 2016. He completed his PhD and postdoc from Stanford in material science, and he has a perovskite silicon tandem solar cell for high efficiency applications. So with that, as always, we'll be taking questions for all of them in Slack. I'll be posting that now. Please add them in a thread as you think of them. We'll be making sure to bring them in throughout the session. And I'll be handing over the hosting abilities to Matt Price so he can be sharing his slides.
Great, thanks, Brenna. Can everybody hear me okay? Making sure my audio is all right and fairly clear. All right, thumbs and head nods, much appreciated. All right, thanks for giving me time this morning, this afternoon, depending upon where you are. My goal is to take up as little time as possible describing the framework that we've put together and shared with our fellows over the years in terms of how to think about building the brain trust, how to choose them, how to maximize the use and the benefit of them, get through the framework elements of that in about 10 minutes, and then turn it over to Nishita and Colin, who can, I think, provide a whole lot more light and I think interesting anecdotes and stories about how does this actually get reduced into practice. And yeah, should be a great event. And I think certainly something that should resonate strongly with this group in terms of ways in which you can get the most out of this fellowship. All right, so I think with that, let me share my screen. And let's see, and we'll kick things off. Wrong share. Okay. So yeah, I think it probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody who's applied to our program that thinking about how to strengthen the team, and especially strengthen the team around the use of external advisors, is something that's critical to us. We've talked about it during the phone screen interview process, even collected information from people early on about where are they in terms of engaging with external advisors. But just to help be authentic and to be explicit about why we think that this is such a critical part of your success, I wanted to give it some attention. So as you're going down this journey, there's a big element of overcoming risks and addressing skepticisms that are going to be perceived by others. And whether those risks are real or not, as long as they're being perceived as being real by that community, addressing those risks and those perceived skepticisms ends up being just such a critical component of the time and the level of impact that we've seen the companies be able to deliver. So really, the advisory board has become a really important piece of this puzzle as it relates to enhancing credibility of the merits of the concept, as well as the knowledge that the leaders of the organization will need to possess in order to navigate the various boundaries and challenges that they will come across. We've seen it go a really powerful way in terms of enabling these people who can be influential in the success of the business and the success of the technology by giving them a sense of ownership, both in the success of the technology, but as well as you as individuals. it has gone a really long way in terms of either extending the track record or beginning to establish one of the most important track records that we think that you'll need to establish and build for yourself, which is your track record of building and surrounding yourself with A-class players all across all elements of your community and different stakeholders around the organization. And then lastly, the advisory board, it's a framework that a lot of people in the startup community and in the innovation community are really comfortable with. And so ultimately we're going to get into like, how do you actually go and find these world-class people who can play a significant role in recruiting talent and raising money, in building out your teams? Like, how do you actually reach out to them and convince them to lend their passion, their experiences in helping you, and having a framework that they're comfortable with and that the community is comfortable with ends up being something that helps reduce some of the friction in establishing those relationships. And so having this advisory board framework is something that everybody's comfortable with, is something that should be taken advantage of. We're so focused on this primarily because we've seen the right advisors can really help set time management and the strategic priorities, better than we can as a program team, as an organization. Oftentimes they're closer connected to the markets, closer connected to the financial world, and closer connected to the technology development. They bring about an accountability, and we've seen time and time again that accountability beyond oneself just drives significantly higher level of performance and results. And then there's an element of, in this fellowship program, a lot of what these 2 years is about making mistakes and failing and finding your leadership voice, finding your communication, figuring out how do you want to influence people around you. And ultimately coming out of this program, if things continue to progress, you're likely operating in a world where you've got actual board of directors. And using these advisors in the advisory board meetings ends up becoming a really safe play space and playground for figuring out, how do you attract those people, and then how do you manage up and manage those types of stakeholders that are around you, that have that fiduciary responsibility and governance responsibility of the organization. So that's at the highest level. If I took it down to the ground level to say, if thinking back over the last 5 years, like very specific and tangible things that we've seen these external advisors and the advisory boards do and provide to our fellows, it spans a wide spectrum in terms of addressing risks, both on the team, technology, market, and finance front. Everything from establishing credibility with government agencies that have been helpful in raising funds, both on the government side as well as faster investor connections and an outside source for due diligence for investors. On the marketing side, getting the connections not just to the right organizations, but the right people within the organizations, and to make that customer discovery process, not necessarily faster, but I would say certainly higher quality, because ultimately it comes down to the quality of the people that you're interacting with. A lot of the skepticisms that these projects and your projects are going to be facing has to do with the economic value and the techno-economic value, which is why we have a whole module on modeling those techno-economics, of the technologies that you're working on. But your model is only going to be as good as the credibility upon which it's presented. And if it's just coming from you, your credibility is at one level. And then more outside people who customers, strategic partners, and investors can look at and say, she's this great industry expert, she's evaluated this model, and provides that outside credibility around the value that you're working on, ends up becoming, we've seen that time and time again be helpful. And then, lastly, on the team side, both there's elements of some of the advisors that you should be surrounding yourselves with. Part of the recipe is they've walked in your footsteps before and understand a lot of the challenges that a leader of a startup organization is going to face, both personally and professionally. And so just having somebody who you can go and talk to and share things that are happening in your life is something that's critical from a just general health and energy standpoint. So that's on the personal side. And then on the team side, bunch of the elements that the investor community primarily, but somewhat on the strategic partner side too, is some of the questions that they're going to be asking is, how do you define what a great person is for your organization, and how good are you and how good is your team at surrounding yourself with other great people? And so we've seen these external advisors help provide that credibility to you around your ability to build a team, but then also the network that they carry with them to be able to attract other advisors as well as first hires into the organization. So an enormous amount of impact if the right people are found and if the people are used the right way. And really that ends up being the secret sauce and what I should be getting out of the way for and letting Colin and Nishita kind of share their experiences on it. Before I do so, I'm a frameworks person. Maybe it's because I'm an engineer, maybe because I went to business school, but like I just operate with frameworks. So there's 2 frameworks that I put together in these slides that you can look at later if it's helpful in terms of thinking about how do you choose an advisor, how do you define them. So the first framework I put down, I called the top-down gap analysis, which is, if you look at the domain column on this table on the left-hand side, you see our friendly technology team, market, and finance categories around where value needs to be created or risk reduced. And within each of those domains, there's a question of how good is your knowledge, how strong is your network, and how strong is your reputation. And so the top-down approach is both an internal reflection, just you by yourself, you with your founding team, you with some of the peers that you have in your organization or around you right now, just spending time and just looking at it from the highest level. Like, where do I have these areas covered across technology, market, finance, and team, and across these specific gaps? And where you have it within the team, then great, allow it to reside there with the team. And where it's missing, when you don't have a lot of money, is where an external advisor can play a critical role. And with this top-down gap analysis, as you identify the categorization of the people that you're looking for, and you'll hear this time and time again, the thing that we've seen is playing the largest element of success of being able to recruit a strong advisory board is to find that first straight, to have one strong advisor that you can use to help attract other great advisors around you. The second framework is more of a bottoms-up gap analysis, which is rather than having this kind of clean on paper team, technology, market, finance categorization, there's more of a grassroots element of asking these questions. So what are the 3 biggest skepticisms that others perceive about your concept? And then who are the best people that could address those perceived concerns? That can start building out that list. The next question is, what are the 3 companies that are the most likely first adopters of what it is that you're working on? And then who are people that can help you connect most quickly to those companies? And that can help from both a technology and a team and market risk reduction standpoint. And then different, but still equally important, is just whose professional opinion do you trust? And it's come up in our prior conversations that you're going to get a lot of advice, a lot of opinions, and a lot of feedback, oftentimes that are inconsistent and incoherent with each other. So whose do you listen to? And at the end of the day, having somebody that provides a shoulder that you can cry on, or just somebody that you can turn to help synthesize this information that you just inherently trust because you believe that he or she has built into your personal success, is a really important element of the portfolio of the people to surround yourselves with. And again, regardless if you're building out this list, finding one great, strong person to help you go down this endeavor of building a strong advisory board, the better it goes. Last one here, and we're going to be spending a whole lot more, we'll be spending more time on this, but in terms of once the beginning stages or even the final stages or initial stages of that advisory board have been built out, how do you maximize their impact? And so the 3 things I put down here is engage them regularly whether it's cadence of phone calls or advisory email or newsletter that you put together, like just get into a cadence of information that's delivered in a well-organized way and at the right tone and at the right level. And our team and our community can help with that. Separate from engaging them on an individual basis is this idea of finding really productive ways of bringing them together, because the right board brought together as a consistent group, that whole is significantly greater than the sum of the parts. And we'll have some more conversations about where this has worked and where fellows have had challenges in assembling their advisory board together as a group and using that group time together in the most productive way. And then the last one is really around the interpersonal skill set of establishing that trust and that rapport and that respect, where they're in it not because they're a consultant that's looking to get business, from you 3 years from now as you're growing, but they're in it because they believe in you as a person, they believe in the vision, they believe in your North Star, they've seen you be honest, they've seen you be vulnerable, they've seen you be transparent, they've seen the warts and the failures and how you've recovered from them. And they want to be there to share those wins, to help you recover from those failures. And they want to be there to help you. So getting beyond just the pure transactional stage and into a strong interpersonal relationship stage ends up being a really critical element to this. So that's the framework. And then I would love to give both Nishita and Colin kind of 5 to 10 minutes to talk about, what's their experience been in terms of how they thought about their advisors. Questions I've prepared them with are, one, what do they think of this framework? Is this totally ridiculous? And this is just a business school kind of presentation output and none of it actually plays out that way in the real world. How did they find theirs? How did it evolve over time? What worked? What didn't work? And then it would be great to spend the last 15, 20 minutes with you all, kind of peppering them with your questions and or sharing your experiences on this topic. So I think with that, Nishita, it would be great if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nishita. So I'll first answer what Matt said about the framework. I actually find the framework to be pretty helpful. It doesn't even need to be like very detailed. But for us, like what was helpful starting out was just having some idea of where our gaps were. I think just the exercise of thinking about like what you're missing helps. And obviously that's going to change over time. You don't always know like where your gaps are and things are always changing. But like now we have like kind of an advisor wish list in different areas. And so it's helpful because what I found in recruiting advisors, it's not always like a very fixed process. Like one of our advisors, for example, Josh, he's been super influential. That one happened very organically. This was like a meeting that we had really early on and then didn't talk to him for a while, started talking to him again when we sort of pivoted into a market that he was more familiar with. And then it kind of grew into this more advisor-mentor relationship and he's been super helpful. And I would say that one happened like very organically, but we had some idea that we knew we needed somebody in this space. So when I say in this space, basically, our big gap for our market was that we were entering a new market. We were basically creating the market for our technology. And so like one big thing that we knew we needed to do was get some credibility around the market and understanding how this new market's going to be created and that we're really serious about doing it. And so it was really important for us to find an advisor in that space who had been deeply embedded in the network and understands like how to navigate this new emerging market. So that was a really helpful thing for him to give us credibility for. But kind of like, referring back to Matt's table, I think having an idea of who your like wish list of advisors is helpful because when you go out and inevitably you're talking to customers, people are introing you to someone else who's really smart. You're meeting a lot of people all the time. I think you don't even realize how many people you're meeting all the time. It's kind of nice to always have in the back of your head some idea of like who could be an advisor, who are you looking for? Because when you meet that person, organically, it might click to you and you might realize, okay, this person actually could fit this role really well. And I kind of already know what I need and who I need to fit that role. I think it's in other examples, like some of the like process of finding an advisor can be a little bit more fixed. So for example, for us, like one person that we're still looking for is somebody who has really deep technical experience in neuroscience. So there's definitely like very targeted people that we're looking for to recruit as advisors. So in that sense, it can be a much more fixed process. But again, just having an idea of like who that wish list is helps you sort of narrow down who you're looking for, and also keep it in mind when you're meeting people. I will add, you know, when you're starting a company, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. And I think what advisors can do is not only fill in those gaps, but also augment your abilities to some extent. So I almost think of advisors now as sort of like extra limbs in a way. I feel like that's a bad example, but they're sort of like augmenting your abilities instead of people who are gonna, you know, necessarily grill you because you're not good enough in a certain area, you have a gap in a certain area. They will grill you, but the purpose of an advisor is really to be able to share all of the difficulties and challenges that you're going through and have their feedback, so it then augments your abilities in that space where you didn't have a lot of lived experience or you don't know a lot yet. So that's just like my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, thanks, Nishita. Colin, do you want to talk a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. So I'll take a few minutes to intro each of the advisors, because I think they bring a different story, value to how the company has progressed. Certainly, without them as a whole, the company wouldn't exist at all today. I guess that, and then maybe give a couple anecdotes, and sort of tease any questions that you guys have in the Q&A session where you talk about these more. So I've had I think 8 advisors. I still have 7 of them in some fashion or another engaged with the company, and they've been extremely useful. And my path through life is very much an ad hoc path through life. So no formalism in any way that I do things. So certainly not in finding advisors. But I'll say my first advisor I found through a very similar program to Cyclotron. He's actually the guy who pushed me to apply for Cyclotron Road right at the beginning. I didn't know a whole lot about this guy, but he, it turned out that he was a big enough guy to then have to leave and go run the U.S. Solar R&D program a year later, which is why he's no longer on the list. But to Matt's description earlier about finding that first advisor, he really precipitated all the rest of the advisors to come on and join. And so, to go down the list this year, I found through him, I found more or less the next 3 advisors. And Doug Hall, his expertise is in project planning and techno-economics, and he really took the time to sit down and help me put together what an actual manufacturing cost model that I could stand behind looked like. Dave Eaglesham, he's the Klaus guy. He has the respect of all of the investors and all the business leaders in solar and the investors in the Silicon Valley, because he's the guy who was the CTO of the only successful thin film solar company at the time that it made its huge growth. And so whenever investors go to do their due diligence, they always talk to Dave to see whether or not there's anything truly exciting behind what we're doing at Tandem. And so having him on board really puts the investors at ease. Chris has got an interesting story. He's been at thin film and silicon solar companies throughout his whole 35, 40-year career. And he started as my advisor, but when I needed a new co-founder, he stepped up And so he's now my co-founder. Started as an advisor, but for the last 3 years, he's been a full-time co-founder with me at Tandem. Greg, I found through a program at Stanford, just through a social happy hour, and he's on the customer side. So he was the chief science officer for one of the major solar retailers in the United States, and he drank the Kool-Aid. Right? He knew higher efficiency could change the game for residential installations, and he has continued to drive installers and contractors to understand the value of higher efficiency in residential systems. Even he had an RBE grant that he just finished in order to formalize the value of efficiency so that everybody can understand why we're making something that people should pay more money for and should put on their rooftops. And so from a customer side, it's extremely valuable at both advocating for us as well as helping us understand what the value of our product really is. And then I've got 3 more that are not on this list. One person I found while I was trying to hire, she is a director at another startup here in the Bay Area, and I couldn't afford to hire her away. And so instead I made her an advisor for her to help us in some of the scale up and manufacturing challenges that we face, and hope to build that relationship so that I can hire her when I can afford her. And she's pretty awesome. And then more recently, we took our first round of investment. I brought on 2 business advisors, and I hadn't done that before. But the first 6 people here are technical advisors, and then I built a business advisory board because I didn't understand all the various nuances of safes and convertible notes and price rounds, and all of the legalese language that is market or non-market within the documents they may go through with strategic investors or partners in other companies, and they've really been valuable at helping me identify flags that I otherwise would not have noticed in my lack of expertise in trying to put together collaborations and strategic investments and other things with companies. So that's just a brief. And then I'll say one more thing, is that the folks you see on the page, they were the ones who were my advisors during Claxon Road, and I had them in my quarterly meetings throughout my 2 years, and they came to be in my corner. They came to trust me, and so when I had a big spat, if you will, with my original co-founder, and harsh words were said, Matt and Milan and the others were in that call. They had my back, and when that guy left, I thought about shutting down the company. I didn't want to do it by myself, and Chris stepped up and offered to be my co-founder. So they, this group of guys here, Tandem TV wouldn't exist if I hadn't built that relationship in the quarterly board meeting. and if, I hadn't brought them on as advisors in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. So I think what we'd do is turn into Slack. I'd be most rewarding for you all to think through your questions and ask them of the group, and I can help surface them. Maybe as you're thinking about those questions, I'll start with one, which is, well, maybe I'll start with two, and I'll let Nishita and Colin kind of decide both, one or the other that they want to respond to. But I would say if Tom and Amy and I, as we were preparing for the session, we thought about like, what are the challenges that we've seen fellows have in thinking about advisors? Oftentimes they start with, some people from the business incubator that were tied to their school and probably an academic founder or academic advisors who are familiar with their technology. And that's a great starting point, but I think the complexion of an advisory board that has some local incubator support and some academic co-founders is pretty different from one that's got CTOs and CEOs of billion-dollar organizations, whether it's in solar or in medical devices or directors of clinical hospitals. And so the thing that we often hear come up, I think, the most is as it relates to the challenges or one of the concerns that fellows have had about surrounding themselves with some of these like world-class advisors is uncomfortable letting them kind of see how the sausage is being made and all the challenges that are associated with going from where the concept is at the time that they're in the fellowship to where it needs to be. So would people like that even want to engage kind of at that level of messiness kind of associated with the concept? And then the other one is, well, these are really impressive people, which is why the fellows would want to bring them in as advisors in the first place. So the last thing I want to do is embarrass myself or look bad, in front of this group. Like, I don't mind looking bad in front of, my academic co-founders because they know about as much about the business side of this as I do. So it would be great to just talk about, like, were those problems that you guys faced at any point as you were going through with it? If you did, how did you get comfortable with it? Maybe let's just start there. Nishita, you want to go first?
Yeah. So actually, I think my advisor Josh is a really good example of this. I didn't talk enough, talk in a lot of detail about how that happened. So first off, I will say, like, I think it can be pretty intimidating to sometimes approach these people that are just completely outside of your network and outside of your like kind of comfort zone. Early on, I'd always been looking for somebody who was more of a business mentor. We kind of knew that we had a lot of connections to people who were technical. But kind of what I alluded to is we were creating technology for a market that doesn't exist. And so I knew that I needed somebody who was in the business space, in that market, who had experience with that market, who could help us out. And so I actually started talking to Josh. So basically for the first 3 quarters of our fellowship, we were a medical diagnostics company. We pivoted in like February of this year, pretty late into the game. The entire time we had always like thought about the market that we're in now as the market we would eventually be in, but it wasn't the one that we felt comfortable being in first. And so I started talking to Josh before we pivoted, and I was pretty straightforward. And I was like, this is what we're thinking. These are the issues we're having. This is, what we want to do, but we don't really know how to do it. It was very, like, I laid everything out. And I actually found that he was very receptive to it. In general, I found people are actually pretty receptive to, when you ask for help. People want to help. In general, I find that people do want to help. And so, I basically laid it all out and told Josh, this is what's going on. This is what we're thinking. What do you suggest? And then over the next like 2-3 months, he helped me kind of formulate a new structure for our company and a new positioning that made a lot more sense for us long term. And so I definitely worked with him in getting to that point, and he definitely made me feel more confident in kind of making that pivot and making that switch. So I think in general, and obviously, Colin, you can add your 2 cents here too, but I think that people that I've interacted with they want to help. People like to help. especially people who are experts in a space, they want to talk about the stuff they know. And so in general, I found that most people are quite approachable, and it's worth a shot. The worst that can happen is that it doesn't go well and you don't keep talking to them. But if you don't try, you weren't going to talk to them anyways. And I think, with most things, when it comes to running a company, you have to sort of put yourself out there and take the risk and see what happens. And I found that it does, for the most part, pay off, and people are actually very receptive and wanting to help. I forgot, was there more to your question, Matt?
No, and there's a bunch of other questions that are coming in, so I think that gets to the point, and we'll get to some of these others. But yeah, Colin, do you want to take a stab at responding to one of those two? Letting them see the sausage getting made and being embarrassed about looking bad in front of them.
Yeah. So to that point, I suppose in my experience, professors are better suited to consultancies than advisorships, and that with your technology, you probably have some pretty specific questions in order to get you to the next spot in terms of your product development. But you guys are all here because you are already a resident expert in your technology. So surrounding yourselves with other people who are resident experts in your technology maybe gets you a little bit, but that's still more of a consulting role than it is an advisory role. And I think maybe it's just the way I built my advisory board, but everybody on that advisory board has started a company before, so they already know how the sausage is made. And if I just told a clean story about how everything was looking rosy, then they would already know I was lying. It's bullshit. So to more to the point, certainly in those first few quarters and still today, right? I'm a first-time founder. I encounter things that completely outside of the technology that I have no idea how to overcome, right? Whether they're HR issues or recruitment issues, or whether to raise the price round or go for strategic investment, or whatever question you might have. All of those guys, having started companies before and knowing how the sausage is made, they have provided that help to me, that if I didn't let them into those difficulties I have and have had in the past, they wouldn't be able to help. And that's basically what they're there for. Even though they're on technical advisory board, and they have helped me think about sort of product integration and maybe broader market strategic choices. That's basically like 10% of what I use it for, right? Whereas the other 90% is because they know what it's like to be in a small startup and go from nothing to something, and how to overcome the obstacles at each step of the way.
Yeah, great. Normally I'd ask people to read out their questions, but as I'm seeing them come through the thread, there's some that are, I think fall into some nice groups. And so I think I'll take liberty at trying to pull some of these into groups and have Colin and Nishita respond to. And, Tom and Amy, it'd be great to get your voices in here as well. Yeah, I think if I look at these first 4 questions that came through, there's a bunch of ones about how to go to zero, go from 0 to 1 as it relates to that first advisor. So questions like, is there a formal agreement that you have them sign? If there is a formal agreement, do you message this around being a 1 year, whether it's formal or informal, is this a 1 year agreement or a 2 year agreement that you can use to help think about mitigating risk? Is there like an official designation of advisor, that you give to them? And if so, like, what are the parameters and the expectations that you would put on that, on that officialness? And if you do find somebody, through any of these avenues, at what point in the relationship do you float the idea of like, will you be, like, will you be the advisor, whether that's an official advisor or an unofficial advisor, or whether it's, 1 year or 2 years. So, yeah, Nishita, a little bit about like, when do you ask? How do you set expectations? You've had some change. Colin, you two have had some change. Maybe a couple of minutes on that thread.
It's a lot of questions.
I can bring it back too if you get lost.
Okay, so thinking how to structure this. So we actually right now, Colin is at a much later stage than us, but we right now don't have formal agreements. We're in the process of creating formal agreements with our advisors. So we, as I just described, we kind of pivoted markets in February. And so before that happened, I kind of had a sense that that would probably happen. And so we just kept things very informal with our advisors before then. So there are 2 other advisors that we were kind of working with who made sense for our previous market that we're no longer working with. But we hadn't formalized any sort of agreement. I kind of knew because we weren't super sure about what market we were going to enter, it didn't make sense to formalize anything. So they were still great resources and advisors. It didn't feel like it affected the relationship in any way. And so now that we've sort of settled into the market that we're going to be in, I would definitely want to formalize agreements with my current advisors, mostly because they've been really helpful and I'd like to give them something back as well in return for what they've done for us. And so I would say in the early stages, at least based on my experience, because we were very forthcoming about, being in an exploratory phase, all of our initial advisors were very much informal. They're people who were experienced in their fields who could give us feedback on whether our approach was the right approach or not. It wasn't really like we were looking for, a very structured advisory board to put together at the moment. That's something that we're now trying to do. So we are moving into the phase of having formal agreements. I don't know what it is for Colin now at this point, since it's been much later for him. What were the other questions, Matt?
What kind of expectations did you set, in those early informal engagements?
I don't know that I necessarily set expectations. It felt like a lot of the meetings happened pretty organically because I needed help with something or they knew what I was doing and would offer some resources. So I'd say it happened very organically. And again, some of that I think is because we haven't formalized anything yet. As far as when did I ask them if they would be an advisor? I did at some point in the past. With Heidi, it was quite a while ago, but with Josh more recently, I did formally ask hey, we're going to go out and fundraise. Are you comfortable with being on our slides and being on our materials? That's sort of how I broached that topic because, initially you're sort of working with them privately, one-on-one most of the time. So no one necessarily really knows. It's not until you start putting it out to the world on your materials, or if you're fundraising, you want to talk to investors, or kind of like what Colin said, investors might want to do diligence with some of the advisors that you have on your material. So we've also had that happen already. I think once you're at that point, then it's important to really formalize a relationship and make sure everyone's on the same page, that they're comfortable, backing you in that manner. And I think that helps, provide more clarity on the relationship too.
Great. Colin, formal, informal, expectation settings, agreements at the earlier stages?
Yeah. I think one of the questions was, how do you find them? For the first few, I don't know the degree to which the solar community is representative of, the rest of the community that you guys are in. But I think the one thing that is general is, surrounding entrepreneurship and fellowship programs like Conrad are a bunch of people who want to be advisors. And so, you sort of already have the pick of the litter if you go to Conrad social events. They're there. People are around. Everybody who hangs around Activate Conrad, they're game to be advisors, more or less. And so, I found my first advisor through a similar program consequence of having received a fellowship through them. And you know, I basically just with all the first 3 or 4 guys, I had specific questions, and so you know, starting a company for the first time, I was like, how do you do this? Right? Is this something I need to start a company around? Should I be doing something else? Is there value in this? And you know, they gave good advice. And I suppose for me, the finding advisors is sort of like dating, and you know, going on a few dates, and basically asking them their advice. Some people give better advice than others. Yeah, I like this guy. He gives pretty good advice. It's helping me out. And you know, my wife still makes fun of me for this, but you know, I formally asked her to be my girlfriend one day, and she still asks about it to this day. She's like, why did she even ask me that? But I did that to my advisors too. It's like at some point, it's like, you know, will you be my advisor? And for quite a while, like you can sign them up to an NDA, and you know, to the degree that they're comfortable with that and you're comfortable with that, then easy enough to have them be informal advisors. But once you're incorporated, like you can download a pretty easy document to formalize the whole process. And I set expectations in the formalization for having them engage, basically locking them in beyond Tiger Road. So everybody signed up to a 3-year advisorship agreement, and everybody's fine with that. You know, they want to see your long-term success. You know, the crop of advisors has changed since I, you know, started to walk in different circles, but certainly those first few folks that I engaged with at Tomcat and at Farm Road, they were already retired. So you know, this was what they did for fun, and so you know, they were willing to put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you know, basically being mentors for the next 3 years at least for you know, a new time founder. That sounded like a lot of fun to them, and so you know, they were game to try.
Yeah. Tom, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this topic, but as you prepare your thoughts for it, I'll say one of the things that we've done to help, you'll hear this, I think from me and probably from the program team a lot, is like to move things forward, you need to create forcing functions. It's certainly true in raising funds, and it can be true in terms of recruiting advisors. So, you know, while we're not your bosses, and we've mentioned that before, and we're not overly prescriptive in how to do things, one of the things that we've armed ourselves and you with is with a requirement, whether it's hard or soft, formal or informal, I don't know, but like almost having a requirement to be in this fellowship program is to form external advisors. And there is a requirement to have quarterly board meetings. So we'll get into this question of like, how do you use these external advisors in these quarterly board meetings and this whole summer, you know, wholes being greater than the sum of the parts. But one of the reasons that we did that was to create a forcing function where as you're finding people who you like, that you think could be good, and the question's like, well, how do you pop the question? Our hope is that by having somewhat of a forcing function created by this expectation of having external advisors and having those external advisors in these quarterly meetings, almost kind of puts the, the responsibility and activates, role. It's out, it's a requirement that we're putting on you to take away some of the, I think, initial fears or embarrassment of asking that formal question of like, will you be my advisor?
Yeah, I can jump in there, Matt. I have a kind of related observation that you can actually use the quarterly meetings as a means of sort of test driving a potential advisor, and understand what value they can create, particularly in a sort of synergistic way with the other people in the room. Like, do they actually get along well? Do they add value? In a sort of sum being, the sum being greater than the parts way. We find people don't do that as much as we encourage them to. I will observe over the last 2 cohorts, it's a minority of teams, I think, who are using their advisory board, creating an advisory board and getting as much value out of it as they should. And as Matt says, we're not your boss, you're not going to get kicked out of the program if you don't assemble an advisory board, but I certainly will get on your case about it, because we think this is a fundamental pillar of the program, and it's a classic thing where it's good for you, but it's painful. And so you're disinclined to do this yourself. So we will be bugging you to do this. And if you don't do it, you're going to be subject to me asking, do you really think that, you can Google all the answers that you have, instead of engaging with the outside world. So, Amy, you want to jump in on your observations?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, just to echo what all the folks said here, I think my experience has just been the best way to get to know someone is to test drive them with a certain project or scope of work. And so you'll figure out pretty quickly who is going to roll up their sleeves and participate and who is just floating around your inner circles. So if you can craft some specific work product or specific asks and see who's giving you the most enthusiastic support, even above and beyond perhaps what you're asking for, it's a really quick way to vet folks that you might want to bring into your boards.
Okay. Brenna, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more question, or is there a wrap up that we need to prepare for?
If it's a speed round and we can wrap in 3-ish minutes, then yes. I think
Okay.
we can do it.
I mean, I don't know if it's speed round, but I think we can, as a group, we can hold ourselves to a 3-minute discussion. There's a question on here that sorry, I lost it in terms of So Sam's question was comment on the dynamics between advisors and how to build a team where the sum is greater than where the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And Colin, I think maybe I'll ask you to start with that, because I do think that you just did just a really incredible job, not just of forming an external group, but actually pulling them together on a quarterly basis and getting them either in the room together or on the phone together. My quick overlay and commentary on what was actually happening in that room was the advisors were enjoying the intellectual collaboration amongst themselves in as much as they were enjoying the mentorship role that they were providing to you on an individual basis. And so, that's for me, there's an element of that's why, the group dynamic actually creates an opportunity for you to bring in even stronger people than what you would do if it's a one-on-one interaction, because the one-on-one interaction will only be as strong as your relationship with that individual. But in a group interaction, you've got Dave Eaglesheim's relationship with you, but you also have Dave Eaglesheim's relationship with Doug Hall. And if you bring them in the room together, then you're the architect and you get to be the one who gets that credit for facilitating that intellectual exchange or of information and joy. Anyway, I'll stop talking and turn it over to you with your perspective on it.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick and say 2 things. The first is from Dane, who used to say, right, that influential people like hanging out together. And whether this is your, building an investor group, like they like to talk on the golf course about the companies that they've invested in. The same is true for your high-profile advisors. They like to be on the phone and be able to chat to each other. And so, you know, recruiting the next person, you know, they get to say, oh, well, if I join the advisory board of Canyon TV, then I get to chat with Dave Eaglesham and build my own network as a consequence of participating in quarterly board meetings. And that, you know, that's a non-zero attraction to a lot of people. The other thing I'll say about the sum being greater than parts is that, you know, when I call individual advisors, it's about a specific question, right? It's very down in the weeds. I just want to answer. In the quarterly meetings, they're very much high-level strategic questions, and there's a lot of debate. And without that, you know, intellectual back and forth and that time set aside for, are we going in the right direction as a company, in the right direction technologically, I don't think those conversations would happen. And so having everybody sit together for a couple hours every 2 months is way more valuable, you know, in addition to having, you know, calling them individually periodically when that is a good question.
Yeah. So I think with that, thank you, Colin and Nishita, you know, for doing this. There's some other questions that are in here. There's another slide that I didn't present that is somewhat of a most frequent questions and answers to it. So we'll put together some written responses to this and disseminate it out to this group. And we'll be having a session before your quarterly board meetings that's specifically about, you know, how to get the most out of those quarterly board meetings. And weave in how these external advisors can play a role into that. And this is a topic that we think is just really important. So assuming there's continued interest to dive into it, we're more than happy to facilitate this type of session again and go into the deeper analysis. So that, thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and everyone who joined. We'll see you same place next week. And we'll be talking more about building your own team and your co-founders. So have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.